Welcome back to the channel. Some years ago, almost 10 years ago, I hosted a podcast called SCIFI on Screen. The podcast lasted about 5+ years, and I gently closed it down in order to transition into a YouTube channel talking more about books and movies. But I reviewed films one at a time, sometimes compared originals to remakes, sometimes I did special shows. But a lot of the criticisms and a lot of the critiques and analysis that I did for these films, I stand by. And so I thought, since I've done over about 100 shows, that I would share the archives with my new audience here on my YouTube channel. The shows range from about 45 minutes or so more of a podcast. I'll just put up a static image of the old logo, and you can listen and enjoy. I'm going to do these weekly, and hope you enjoy. Welcome to Sci-Fi on Screen. I'm your host, Jeff Palermo, and in this week's episode, we're going to be talking about James Cameron's 1984 seminal sci-fi film, The Terminator. A bit of background on the production of The Terminator. Cameron, at the time he conceived of the film, was doing sort of a press junket, I guess, for Piranha 2 of The Spawning, which he did not begin to directed for a while, then was tossed out of the director's chair, but remained on the film. Supposedly, legend has it, they had a dream about a metallic torso dragging itself out of an explosion while holding kitchen knives. At that point, he wrote a draft for The Terminator, very much in the thrall of John Carpenter. And when I look at The Terminator, I think of The Terminator, I also think of The Shape in Carp's Halloween, which I released for a podcast possibly the week before this or maybe earlier. So definitely similarities, but he was a big fan of Carp, as was a lot of his contemporaries at the time. So he did say his other influences while writing the script were 1950 science fiction films and some episodes of The Outer Limits, as well as films like The Driver and also The Road Warrior, which I believe had come out a couple of years earlier. He needed someone to help him with the script, and he called a guy named Bill Wisher, who was a friend, who rewrote it with him. And the original script actually involved 2 Terminators sent to the past. The first one was like Arnie's, T-800, Cyberdyne Systems Model 101, while the second was the liquid metal cyborg that couldn't be destroyed, with conventional weaponry. Cameron couldn't figure out a way to do the liquid metal guy in 1983. At the time, he's like, he was stating that he was seeing things in his head that couldn't be done with existing technology. So we had to kind of retool it and take the liquid metal cyborg out. So interesting to kind of get a sense that the T2 Terminator was already in his head at the genesis of the first film. A woman named Gail Ann Hurd, who I believe was Cameron's wife for a while, bought the rights to the Terminator from him for $1. Cameron and Hurd had also worked with Roger Corman, which is how Cameron got his start in film. They had some other friends who used to work with Corman who were friends at Orion Pictures, which was part of MGM. And Orion gave Cameron a distribution deal if Cameron could come up with the financing for the film itself. So the script, I believe, was bought by a guy named John Daly. And before that, Cameron was pitching the idea to Daly to finalize the deal. He got Lance Henriksen to show up to the meeting before Cameron as the Terminator. So Henriksen shows up to this guy's office, kicks down the door, dressed in a black leather jacket. He had gold foil in his teeth with, the shades and fake cuts on his face. I don't know if he had a prop gun or not, but he just shows up and sits in the chair, kind of freaking Daly out. And then Cameron arrived shortly afterwards, which kind of relieved the staff, because Henriksen, I guess, was playing it very straight and did not flinch. Obviously, this guy Daly, impressed with Cameron's verve and the script, bought it, and they got his financing. Interesting about casting Arnold, right? And here's a quote from Cameron, and all this information is right from Wikipedia, so I pretty much steal from Wikipedia at large when I do these podcasts. So if you're interested, you can head on over to the Terminator page and you'll see all this, you'll see the supporting links to it as well. So there's a quote from Cameron that goes, quote, "Casting Arnold Schwarzenegger as our Terminator, on the other hand, shouldn't have worked. The guy is supposed to be an infiltration unit, and there's no way you wouldn't spot a Terminator in a crowd instantly if they all looked like Arnold. It made no sense whatsoever, but the beauty of movies is that they don't have to be logical. They just have to have plausibility. If there's a visceral cinematic thing happening that the audience likes,
They don't care if it goes against what's likely. So, interesting little quote, I thought, from Cameron. Cameron's first task here was to find someone to play Kyle Reese. Cameron very dubious about casting Schwarzenegger. I believe Conan had been filmed already, so Cameron knew of Schwarzenegger. He figured if he casts Schwarzenegger as Kyle Reese, he's going to have to find someone even bigger to play the Terminator, or, the tension that wouldn't be there. Funnily enough, the studio had suggested O.J. Simpson for the role as the Terminator, but Cameron did not feel that Simpson would be believable as a killer, so take that one as you will. Basically, Cameron decides to meet with Schwarzenegger about the film. His plan to avoid casting him is to kind of get into an argument with him and alienate the guy, and then return back to his backers and say, look, the guy's just a jackass and we got to find someone else. But Schwarzenegger really launched into this whole thing about how the Terminator should look and behave and how it should move like, and Cameron was very impressed. He came back to his backers and basically said, I haven't found a Kyle Reese yet, but I've got a perfect Terminator. And Cameron was funny. He says even the Austrian accent works because it has this strange synthesized quality, like they hadn't gotten the voice thing quite worked out yet, which I thought was hysterical. And for the role of Reese, other suggestions obviously were made. Rock musician Sting was considered for a moment. I think he was also going to be part of Dune. I think Dune came out the same year as this did. So Sting, I guess, had thrown his hat in the acting ring at that point. Cameron chose Michael Biehn. I think Biehn was in a movie called The Fan, where he was like the psychopathic stalker. So I don't know what else Cameron had possibly seen him in. Biehn was actually skeptical about the whole thing, but after meeting with Cameron, he got religion, as it were. So again, Gail Ann Hurd says, almost everyone else who came in from the audition was so tough that you just never believed that there was going to be this human connection between Sarah and Reese. They had very little time to fall in love. A lot of people came in and just couldn't pull it off. So, she felt that Biehn had the humanity, and he definitely does. When they're alone, those scenes, there's a vulnerability and the loneliness about Bihn's character that really works, and you really buy their impassioned one night of love. So then, of course, there's the role of Sarah Connor. The first few pages of the script, she's written 19 years old, small and delicate features, pretty in a flawed, accessible way. Cameron pretty much chose Linda Hamilton, who had just been finished filming a film called Children of the Corn, kind of strangely enough. Rosanna Arquette had auditioned for Sarah Connor. Interesting factoid. Cameron and Lance Henriksen were already fast friends, so he found a role for him as Detective Hal Vukovich. And, of course, they scored with Paul Winfield as Traxler. For the special effects shot, Cameron wanted some guy named Dick Smith, who had done work on The Godfather and Taxi Driver. Smith did not take Cameron's offer and suggested his friend Stan Winston for the job, who, is a genius. All the effects you see in there, especially of the Terminator, the facial things that go on when it cuts its eye out and does all that fun stuff. Stan Winston, ladies and gentlemen. And a little background on Cameron. Cameron grew up in a town called Chippewa, Ontario, so he's Canadian. He went to this college in Niagara Falls, and then his family moved to Brea, California in 1971. He was 17 at the time. So Cameron went to Fullerton College, which was like a 2-year community college. Started in 1973 to study physics, then switched to be an English major. Supposedly, when he saw Star Wars, he basically dropped out of school. That's kind of the legend of Cameron. Went to work as a truck driver, wrote stuff when he had the time, and then he's like very self-taught, so according to Cameron, he would go down to the USC Film Library and pull theses and graduate students had written about optical printing or front screen projection or all this kind of stuff, dye transfers or all this film technology that, you learn if you go to school, because he did not go to film school, Cameron. So basically self-taught in that way. And then he went to work for Roger Corman. I believe while or during Corman or just before Corman, he filmed this 10-minute sci-fi script called Xenogenesis, which I have not seen, but I'm told that if you watch it, you get the raw material for Cameron's first 4 movies, which is amazing. Then he was a production assistant for a while, started working as a miniature model maker at Roger Corman Studios, and basically learned how to make all kinds of films and effects by working with Corman. He actually was the matte painter on John Carpenter's Escape from New York, production designer on the film Galaxy of Terror. So, he's a run and gun kind of guy. Learned it all from the streets of filmmaking. And so many people reference Roger Corman as sort of like the unofficial film school. If you couldn't get into USC and back in the early 70s, there weren't a lot of film schools that, you went to work for Corman, you learned how to make films cheap and how they worked and how you produced them. My God, if I could do a little podcast on Roger Corman and how important he is to filming even today, all the people that came through Corman's companies and learned how to make films. Corman would give these people money and they would go make these low budget films, and they learned how to make films by making them, So then at the end of this period in the early 80s, he was hired as a special effects director for Piranha 2. The director left. Cameron jumped in to do it, and then at some point it was taken away from him, I think because he failed to get a close-up of the star at some scene, and I guess the guy running the film flipped out and fired him, but then invited him to stay on the movie as sort of a production assistant, which he did. I guess during some of the post-work that was being done, he had his legendary dream about this Terminator figure, and thus Terminator was born. Schwarzenegger, Arnie had made, I believe, a goofy film called The Villain. He was coming out of his bodybuilding career, having won like Mr. Universe like 5 times in a row. Some incredible, I think from 1970 to 75, like he won every year, which was unheard of at the time. And then he was just starting to make all kinds of movies. And then obviously he made Conan, which was huge. And Terminator was his second really legitimate hit. I think Conan being his first. Terminator really kind of, in a sense, cemented him on the map as quite the star to be reckoned with. So we've gone through about 10 minutes of background on this film, but I feel there's a lot of interesting stuff about it. So let's jump into the film itself. We open and we see a ruined cityscape, and there's a title card that says Los Angeles 2029 AD. And with Cameron, this is a B movie. So, he didn't have a lot of money for the exterior shots that, he had money for later on in his career. What mostly we have here is we can tell they're on a soundstage, and the foreground is sort of real props, and there's, large matte painting in the background. But it's pretty cool. Anyway, we see 2 of the HKs, these Hunter Killers, floating around. They're very cool looking machines, and, in a sense, if you go back and look at them now, they look very much like the V-22 Osprey vertical takeoff and landing vehicles that the Army uses now. Very, very interesting that he was kind of, in terms of design, very ahead of his time, or perhaps was researching the V-22 or these types of things in their early stages. But so the HK is very cool looking. There's a really chilling shot that a land-based HK is sort of this, this giant monster mechanical, thing on a tank tread. We close up on the bottom of it, and it's kind of crushing dozens and dozens of human skulls. Very somber soundtrack by Brad Fiedel, who I neglected to mention in the opening. Brad Fiedel, very cool, sometimes wonky, but most of the time very elegiac and cool soundtrack for this film. And right now, we're getting a very somber synthesized soundtrack. We're seeing this battle between now the men, soldiers who are scrabbling around in the ashes of what looks like a nuclear wasteland, and their laser weapons going back and forth. We fade to black, and we see title card, quote, "The machines rose from the ashes of the nuclear fire. Their war to exterminate mankind had raged for decades, but the final battle would not be fought in the future. It would be fought here in our present tonight." Well, I laugh when I think of the final battle, and this year Terminator 5 is coming out. There is no final battle in the Terminator universe, James. Now we get a full opening credit sequence, and the opening theme written by Brad Fiedel. Beautiful theme, really cool, propulsive, yet a little sad, very dark. But again, I think like so many films that I've podcasted about on this show, Fiedel's music definitely lends a gravity in certain sequences in this film, and it lends a somberness, which elevates this B movie into something a little special. Now, the first sequence of the film I like to call the emergence of the time travelers. So we open up in like this gritty, grimy back streets of Los Angeles. We're close up on a garbage truck, which is interesting because in the moment, the way it's shot, it looked very similar to some of the movements of the hunter-killers in the future. It's one of those trucks that picks up the dumpsters. So it's got these two forking arms that come down and lift the dumpster up. I think Cameron was very sharp in doing that kind of mimicry. And we get a title card during the action, and it reads Los Angeles, 1984, 1:52 a.m. We start with some really great details. We see a guy sitting, he's taking a break in his truck, and we see this swirling trash, and then all of a sudden some like ball lightning, kind of similar to the lightning that the Emperor used in Return of the Jedi. All of a sudden some big flash, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger, buck naked, crouched down, stands, and we have, our Terminator. And it turns out that he's in Griffith Park, and the camera kind of rises up. Arnold walks towards the sort of edge of this half wall, and the camera tracks back and up, and we now are looking out over Los Angeles. It's a great shot. Gives the film, to me, immediately scope, like the Terminator has arrived. He is here to wreak some kind of havoc, and we don't know what. We cut to a bunch of punks, and being the 80s, they were punks, and dressed in army. One guy's got a fatigue jacket on, the other guy's got like a mohawk. Of the three punk actors, one of them is Bill Paxton, who would go on to play the Marine in Aliens. We're screwed, man. Game over, man. And in many other films. There's another actor named Brian Thompson, who would actually go on to play the alien bounty hunter in the later X-Files seasons. Him and Paxton are the ones with the most of the lines. It's cool. Arnold shows up. You're close. Give them to me. And they're kind of making fun of him. They attack him straight away. It's incredible. He pushes one kid out of the way, and then he lifts up, I think it's Paxton's character, and like rips out his heart. Basically sticks his hand in his chest and just rips his heart out. To me, like, number one, it's a really gruesome way to start a film. Number two, it's a very direct way that a mechanical consciousness would shut down a human being by just pulling out the thing that makes it run. So it's very clever in a way. It's these little things. It's the devil's in the details that I think make certain movies what they are, little things that make sense. So then the last guy who's still alive, begins to take off his clothes, and it's the garb that the Terminator will wear for the rest. So then we cut to a second emergence. This time we're in a back alley in downtown Los Angeles, and we see this black ball form briefly in the air with lots of kind of ball lightning going back and forth in it. It's very cool. And then a naked Michael Biehn falls from that black sphere onto the ground. He's got this he's scarred up, which is kind of cool because, again, it's these little details that he has scarring on his back and his shoulder and his arm, which you would being a warrior or a soldier in that future scenario. He basically steals pants off of a homeless guy, but he's spotted by the cops, and then they chase him. Now, there are times during some of the chase scenes when Brad Fiedel has this weird atonal synthesizer cue with electronic drums underneath, and it's just goofy, man. I do not think it works at all, and it makes these chase scenes, to me, it robs them of any kind of dramatic or tension that they might have, because it's just this wonky soundtrack cue playing. It's no, really very atonal synthesizer. It's very weird. But anyway, one of the cops, wanders down the alley, and Reese disarms him and holds a gun to him and asks him what day it is, what year. Cop doesn't answer, so Reese winds up running. He runs into a department store, and we see him snag a raincoat and some sneakers. And when the cops go into the store looking for him, he sneaks out from a second-story window and grabs a shotgun from the cop car, and then kind of very slick, and then kind of walks out to the head of the alley and heads down the street. And to me, it's a very subtle way because, if this is 1984 and you're seeing the Terminator for the first time, you don't know which of these two figures. Obviously, from the poster, it's Arnold, but the way that the Terminator is the bad guy is because he indiscriminately just kills people, and Reese had an opportunity to kill the cop, and he didn't. So to me, it was a very smart, kind of sharp way of differentiating good guy from bad. And Biehn is great, man. He's very intense in this whole film. There's an intensity, a coiled intensity about him that I really think is really amazing. We track Reese to a phone booth. Kind of cracks me up now when I see phone booths in movies, right? In the age of cell phones. He takes the phone book and he sees him looking for the name. And we see his finger kind of track down the name Sarah Connor, and it's written 3 times in the phone book. He rips the page out and takes off. And because this, Cameron's script writing is usually airtight and seamless, we now cut right to Sarah, and we get this sad little music cue Yeah, I don't know. I really think it's great. It's kind of a sad little piano song playing as she's riding her scooter into work. This poor, unsuspecting woman. She's a waitress at something akin to Denny's. What's nice is we track her to her punch in, and when she puts her card back, the camera zooms in, and we see written on the card, Connor, Sarah. So nice way of telling you who this is. Then we briefly cut to the Terminator stealing a car, very easily, I might add. And then back to Sarah having a very rough night. It's very busy. She's got the wrong orders for a group of people. Some kid puts a huge scoop of ice cream down her uniform pocket. And she's just in the midst of this horrible work night. And then her coworker, this woman who knows her, walks up behind her. And we get this throwaway line. Think of it this way, in 100 years, who's going to care, right? So obviously, haha, in 100 years, no one will care because no one will be around to care. So now the Terminator heads into a gun store to arm himself. It's a great scene where he's asking for all the guns specifically by name. Uzi 9mm, 12 gauge autoloader, like he knows the full technical names of each gun. And then he gets to phased plasma rifle in 40-watt range, and the guy's looking at him like, just what you see, pal, which was great. And then the camera tracks is very simply, as a machine would do. I go into a gun store, I buy a gun. I don't buy a gun. I take a gun. I load the gun with ammunition. I kill the gentleman in the store who will try to prevent me from taking the guns out of the store, and I leave. Although, what's starting to happen here is that although Cameron, I think, is, the first part of this movie, Cameron's really couching it as a horror movie. In a sense, the Terminator is the shape from Halloween, as it were. But he's not a good horror director. He's an action movie director and a damn good one. All these little moments when they're, someone like Carpenter or Wes Craven would create horror. Cameron's not good at it. Like even with this gun store thing, I feel like there was a way to create a little more terror and a little more creepiness, but it's very matter of fact. Like Cameron's on a mission. He's like, look, this is the Terminator. This is what he does. Take a look at it. Let's move on. But again, there's a wonderful simplicity about it. The Terminator needs to arm itself. He goes into a gun store, kills the owner, and takes guns. There's a directness about the script, about the Terminator and what it does, and how systematic and direct it is about everything. That's rings very true, I think, and which really gives this film a big ring of authenticity. When we get to T3 and we have Arnold walking out of the strip club with the glasses on, we're done basically. But at this point, a very vital franchise it was. And then as a contrast, we cut over to, the Terminator's feeble human opponent who is cutting off the stock of the shotgun it stole from the cops and making this little sling so it can sling it over its arm, tuck it underneath his arm, and hide it. Terminator's got like AK-47s and all these weapons, and Reese has got basically a pump shotgun of defense. So it's amazing. Then we see the Terminator throw a guy out of a phone booth, and funny action movie line, "You got a serious attitude problem," a guy says off screen, which I think is great. I think sometimes these funny lines in Cameron's movie, I think how much Nolan cribbed from Cameron in his comedy and his action sequences, because I find them very similar. So the Terminator also finds the page with the 3 Sarah Connors, tears it out. Then we cut to a very low angle. It's a shot of a toy truck, and this tire crushes it. The tire belongs to the station wagon the Terminator is stolen. The camera stays, very creative shot. The camera stays on the ground almost, and then kind of swings around, and we see these boots kind of hit the ground as well. And then we hear a small dog barking as the Terminator sort of walks up this woman's property, and this middle-aged woman answers the door. "Are you Sarah Connor?" And all in slow-mo, the Terminator kicks down the door. And we don't see the woman get shot, so it's very off screen. The Terminator shoots into the camera like 7 or 8 times, and the camera drops down, and we know that the woman is quite dead. So at work, Sarah's friend, like, "Sarah, you've got to see this," and she drags her into the room, and she's like, "You're dead, honey," because it's a woman named Sarah Connor has been killed, and how, haha, it's only one woman, it's a coincidence. Then we cut to Reese. He has also stolen a car. He's kind of, at the moment, kind of hunkering down with a car he's stolen near a construction site where there are actual construction cranes and vehicles working. As we track in on those machines, again, reminds him of the machines to come. There's this wonderful match cut, and we're back to one of the machines moving, and then all of a sudden we see the skulls underneath again, and we know we're back in the future. The music changes, and now we see a full-on battle between some soldiers and some machines in the future. Lots of lens flares here, lots of darkness. It's at night. The hunter killers and these tanks that the machines fight with all have lights on them, so lots of lens flares. We see Reese and his partner throwing these pipe bombs at this rolling hunter killer. His partner is about to throw a bomb, but she's spotted very quickly, and we see how fast the machines react, and basically this laser volley kind of blows her up. However, Reese's bomb explodes, destroys it. He gets into a sort of converted car with a large weapon mounted on the hood, and now there's this chase. This hunter-killer is chasing this car, plasma cannon, and it's really cool. Reese is driving, and the car flips over and crashes, and it's on fire. And as Reese starts to scream in the car, he wakes up, and we realize it a bit of a memory/dream, but he's back in the future. I thought that was a really clever way to kind of give us some backstory as to where Reese is from and what he's dealing with. To have it be akin to these machines that are right in the frame, as in a way. It was very clever by Cameron. So now we cut back to Sarah's apartment, and she shares a room with a woman named Ginger, getting ready for the big dates, 80s city. There's a moment when the two of them look into the mirror, and their hair, it's just like, yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is 1984. And Ginger's sporting like a Walkman, like she doesn't exist without a Walkman. She's wearing the headphones and playing these cassettes constantly, and just reminded me of when I was at that age, and I had the first Sony Walkman, and the thing never left my head. I think through most of my teen years. One little note is Ginger's boyfriend, called Matt in the movie, is played by an actor named Rick Rossovich. He was in Top Gun with Tom Cruise and Navy SEALs with Charlie Sheen. So he's one of those 80s actors who, was kind of one of these meathead-looking guys who was in a couple of rough and tumble films in the 80s. So now we cut to the police station, and we meet Detective Traxler, played by Paul Winfield, wonderful actor who I just love, and Lance Henriksen, who plays Detective Hal Vukovich. Henriksen, being a big friend of Cameron's, would go on to play Bishop in Aliens. And it's a great police station scene, very solid scene. You're there. It looks great, makes sense. Phones ringing and desks and solid set. What we're getting here is that Vukovich is telling his boss that two women were just killed in different parts of town, but they share the same name. So we get the information that there was a second Sarah Connor killed. And we hear this language from, Traxler, a one-day pattern killer, so on and so forth. We cut back now to Sarah's apartment, and her date for the evening, I guess she was going to double date with Gina, has canceled. Then we hear another message from her mom, who we're going to, hear a little bit about later. So Sarah decides to go to the movies, and Gina and Matt will go out on some date on their own. There's one pretty good scare where Sarah comes out of the front door of her apartment backwards, and the camera kind of closes in on her. She turns around, and it's Matt playing he just scares her. There's one moment where I was like, all right, you got that one, Cameron. You did that one pretty good. So she goes to her scooter in the parking garage, and she senses someone there. Doesn't see anyone, but the camera closes in on her as if she's sensing somebody. And when she drives away, we see that Reese is shadowing her. Back at the precinct now, the police are trying to reach Sarah, but of course she's away, and this is pre-cell phone era. They keep getting her message, and we cut to her apartment, and we see Gina and Matt getting it on in Gina's bedroom, and Gina's wearing, of course, headphones, and Matt doesn't give a shit, and the phone's ringing in the background. It's going unpicked up, obviously. And we do hear from Traxler, when he briefly gives a statement, that the two women were killed in the order that they appeared in the phone book. And we get this comment from Vukovich. I can just see it now. They're going to call the damn phone book killer, So they're great. They're the hangdog cops, They're really well cast in this, both of them. So now we cut to Sarah in some kind of bar eatery, and she's eating dinner, and she hears on the news of the two Sarah Connor killings, and she looks at it. And when she leaves, because the phone in the bar is broken, so she has to go somewhere else to call the police department, she notices Reese outside following her and ducks into a dance club. Boy, it's 80s time in the dance club. The music and the hair, and woo, it is 1984, ladies and gentlemen. But, it's funny. At this point, it's 1984, but it's because it's a time travel movie and it's supposed to be set in 1984. even though it's dated as we're looking at it, like it's almost a period piece now, if you think about it. It's a very strange way of Terminator being dated. Like it's dated in a way that still serves the film now because 84 is a time travel destination. It was the present in 1984, but now it's the past, and it still works. I don't even know what I'm talking about, but it makes a really cool kind of sense. So I feel like it's not as dated. And obviously, Terminator Genesis is going to take place in the 80s this year. It's coming up, and so we're going to get that same setting and the same costumes and so on and so forth. So I don't know, kind of an interesting thing as Terminator ages through the decades. Back at Sarah's apartment now, we're going to have our first horror scene. There's a police car that had been stationed there, but it was called away. And just as it leaves, the Terminator arrives. Cameron definitely tries for a horror movie setup with Gina listening to her headphones in the kitchen while the Terminator and Matt are fighting for, he's fighting for his life. She doesn't hear anything. He's not a horror movie director. And I think he knew it from the first film that he made. Though he came out of Corman's shop, did work on Piranha, structured Terminator kind of like a horror movie. He was very smart and he went right into action films because he is not a horror film director. There's no terror here because I think horror in a sense requires the way I think he was trying to channel it is kind of how Karp does it. And it requires patience, a sense of timing, and space, and silence, and contrast. Right now we have this killing machine, and Cameron just handles it differently. So he tries. And there's a moment where we get a, kind of creepy scene in slow motion when, Gina is crawling away from him and he pulls out the gun and shoots her like 10 times. And again, we don't see it. We just see him shooting and then we see her eyes dead. So now, this is a nice moment in the film, actually. After he kills her, Sarah called. He was leaving a message on the phone for Gina saying, hey, I'm at this club. I'm really scared. I think there's somebody after me. Help me. And of course, the Terminator hears where the club is, and so he's got it. Two moments in this film where, a lesser filmmaker, you would have been like, how did the Terminator find them? But Cameron puts that in the movie and keeps it real. Finally, in the club, Sarah gets through to Traxler and Vukovich. Basically, they tell her to wait there. But it's too late because Arnie enters. And there's a great scene where a bouncer tries to stop him. He's like, hey, that guy didn't pay. And the bouncer puts his hand on Arnie's shoulder and he just crushes it and the guy just collapses. This is some good tension. He definitely does suspense well to a certain degree. We get in the club. Most of this now is in slow-mo. He walks in and she drops something. So she reaches down to pick up her purse or something and he walks right by her as he's scanning the crowd. Totally misses her, which is kind of cool. But when she comes back up again, she sees Reese and they make eye contact and she's freaking out. But then at that moment, she's spotted by the Terminator who's walking up to her, pulling his, that weapon out he's got the laser sight. He walks right up to her, pulls the gun, but then Reese brings out his shotgun and just like puts 4 or 5 into him. And it's very close. Cameron really shaves it close with the suspense. So he tags the Terminator a couple of times. Terminator brings out the Uzi and he's killing pretty much everyone around and the place breaks up. But Arnold's great here because after the first moment, Sarah's in cover and I think Reese is in cover behind a bar. The Terminator is moving very systematically, like the way it looks and the way it moves the gun. And I could just imagine that this is part of what Arnold was so hot on to tell Cameron, like this is how it would act and this is how a machine would move. But it's cool. It definitely comes across as very cool when you're looking at it. And then he finds Sarah. She's running out the front, I believe, and he Uzis someone right behind her who falls down but knocks her down. So he walks right up to her and is changing mags when Reese opens up on him and tags him like 5 times, blowing him out the window, the plate glass window. So then we get the classic line. Reese grabs Sarah and he says, come with me if you want to live. And then to Sarah's shock, we see the Terminator rise from the street, and Reese guides her out the back of the club into the alley. Now we're getting some visuals from the Terminator's point of view, so we're looking through like a reddish tinge, and we're getting these readouts on the screen, sort of seeing what the Terminator sees, which I think is really cool. Reese grabs a car, and they are about to get away. The Terminator jumps on the hood and smashes his fist through the windshield and pulling at Sarah. But Reese finally gets to throw it off. They escape. The cop, seeing the Terminator on the floor, and because Reese basically hit it with the car, so the cop's like, I got a hit and run here, probably a cadaver. And he's looking the other way, talking on his radio. Terminator gets up and basically throws the cop away, smashes his head on the hood, and now he's in a cop car, which is, part of the two films are so similar in, the bad Terminators using cops, semi-rigs being used, the end being in industrial plants that are set up to, able to dispose of each Terminator. Very interesting. So now we get the first of several car chases in this movie, which are not very interesting, frankly. Cameron's not the best action director for car chases. I mean, Sarah's finally kind of comes to and she realizes what an absurd situation she's in. She freaks out. Bean is very intense here, which is great. But again, Fidel's music is back to that kind of wacko synthesizer, electronic drum stuff, which is just, I don't know, it doesn't play and it doesn't travel very well, shall we say. It's like he's playing it all on a Casio, So then we get Reese, he's starting to open up about who he is. Reese, Sergeant TechCom, DN38416. You've been targeted for termination. We cut back to the Terminator, and we get this first evidence that he can mimic voices when he takes a call in the cop car in response to some kind of, maybe it's Sarah and Reese, but I'm not exactly sure. But we see the first evidence of the vocal mimicry that it can do. So now, we're getting a little bit of an info dump. Who was that man? It's not a man. It's a Terminator. Cyberdyne Systems Model 101. Cybernetic organism. And then we have this pause where Reese has to take out a cop car that's chasing him, which he does quite handily. And again, it's a well-shot car chase, but it's a car chase. I hate car chases. So they finally evade everyone and they take refuge in an underground parking lot. And we get a little more information. Underneath, it's a hyper-alloy combat chassis, microprocessor controlled, fully armored, very tough. And we get more great lines. I mean, I love lines like this. This is why I love sci-fi. The 600s were easy to spot. Rubber skin. These are new. Sweat. Bad breath. Everything. I had to wait till he moved on you before I zeroed him. Just awesome. Now we get the tough part in any time travel movie, which is the transmission of the information that this guy's from the future. And I think Cameron does a really great job here because this is always a hard sell in any movie. You're from the future. I'm from the future. You're from the future. It's insane. I mean, even Zemeckis, right, in Back to the Future, I think because it was a quasi-comedy, it works. I've got to get back to the year 1985. And even then, they have to really, really sell it with some intricate plot stuff where, Michael J. Fox has to shout, I know how you got that bump on your head, and so on and so forth. And so the way Cameron does it, because, Reese can't prove it really. He's not, there's nothing that he knows about Sarah. So they do a lot of misdirection where Sarah says things like, I'm not stupid. They can't build things like that yet. And Reese is like, no, they can't. Not for another 40 years. And she gives us some look like, so you're from the future? And then he answers in this vague way of one possible future. I don't know tech stuff. And they kind of gloss over it, but it works because, she'll find out soon enough the reality of the situation. And Reese doesn't have to convince her because the action in the movie is so intense that it's all they can do to stay alive. And, over time, Sarah will come to understand and believe it herself. So anyway, tough moment, I think, for any time travel film, but Cameron nails it. We end this little sequence with some great lines, and Reese says, quote, that Terminator is still out there. It can't be bargained with. It can't be reasoned with. It doesn't feel pity or remorse or fear, and it absolutely will not stop ever until you are dead. And for a minute, she goes along with him. She's like, can you stop it, Reese? He's like, with these weapons, I honestly don't know, which is great. So the Terminator gets their location because they left the car they dropped off in the parking garage and they grabbed another one, but they haven't left the garage yet. So the Terminator gets their location from the police band again. This is how he finds them. For the moment, they're hiding and it's quiet. And Reese is hot wiring a car. And Reese explains a little bit to her about his role. A few years from now, there's going to be a nuclear war. The survivors, no one knew who started it. It was the machine, Sarah. Defense network computers. They say it got smart. And it's good because, Reese wouldn't know the details. He's just kind of a grunt. He's like, Sarah's asking him, and, did you see this war? He's like, no, I grew up after in the ruins. hunter-killers, the camps. And then he's describing, and it's really chilling, camps were set up for when humans were brought there for orderly disposal. And he's like, we were this close to going out forever. And then one man taught us to fight back, taught us how to smash the machines and, climb the walls of climb the fences of the camps. And that man was John Connor, your son. So, we've got our first little connective tissue here of why they're both after Sarah, which comes at a perfect time, I think. And the tension is ratcheted up because the Terminator is now in the same parking garage, trolling, looking for them. He finally discovers them, and they start shooting at each other. Another car chase. But this one ends in a dead-end street, and the Terminator's cop car smashes against a wall first, but I believe Sarah and Reese's car is also incapacitated. So they're all incapacitated and kind of helpless. Then all the cops close in and arrest them. But when they go to the cop car, the Terminator's gone. Now we cut back to the police station with Vukovich and Traxler. Sarah's inconsolable because she finds out that Ginger and Matt have been killed. And then we also meet Dr. Silberman, who we're going to see in T2 and T3, who plays a psychologist who's brought in to mostly talk to Reese to find out whether the guy's nuts or not. And then we cut to a hotel room and we watch the Terminator repair itself because it took some damage in the fight with Reese and Sarah. And this is creepy. This is definitely a little horror movie-ish, and Stan Winston special effects. It starts with its sort of forearm, the inside of its forearm, where it cuts out a burnt patch of skin. And then the camera kind of moves in, and we see as it's flexing its hand, the rods are moving up and down inside. We watch it reach in with a tool and adjust everything. So at one point, the hand couldn't move, and then when it was done, now the hand has he's restored, full movability to the hand. Very cool. Then we cut back to the police station. So we're in a briefing room. They're bracing Reese. They're questioning him. And we hear Reese say things like, I was in the 132nd under Perry from 21 to 27. And Cameron's very smart here because Silberman asks Reese questions that I think any savvy audience member would begin to ask of this film now that it understands the plot. Silberman first starts with that's 2021 to 2027. And so Silberman's like, well, why not kill Connor in the future? Why this elaborate scheme, right? So in a way, Cameron's putting it out there. He's putting the problems of the film in the film, which I think is great. So we hear from Reese that they'd won, that the machines had lost, that their defense grid was smashed, it was over, and they captured some laboratory complex and found time displacement equipment. I'm sure at this point, now that we've gone so far in the Terminator franchise, that in Terminator Genesis, we're going to see this scene, because I think it's going to open the film, where they do capture this lab complex and we see the equipment and the T-800s, and which would be kind of cool to see as a Terminator fan. So we hear that they discovered that the machines had sent a Terminator back to get Sarah. So the humans send Kyle, and then they blew the place. So we hear from Kyle, and Silberman says, you can't get back. Kyle says, nope, it's a one-way trip. Nobody goes home, but nobody else comes through. It's just him and me, right? And again, I have to laugh now seeing this movie. Oh, Reese, if that were only the case, if the Terminator was only, a single film and, they're popping through left and right, baby. We cut back to the motel, and the Terminator is now cutting its eyeball out, which is gross. But it's cool. The Stan Winston effects when you have to look straight on at the Terminator and see its mechanical eye. You can tell it ain't Arnie. It's not perfect, but it works well enough, And I think given that to some degree the Terminator is a robot, if there are times when it doesn't look fully human, it's sort of okay. And then we see him, once he cuts his eyeball out, he blots the skin with, stops the bleeding and then puts on a pair of sunglasses to cover the damage. And then basically we see him load up with like an AK-47 and all kinds of shotguns and exits the motel room. So now we're getting more Silberman cynicism, again, more some of the problems of time travel films. Why didn't you bring any weapons with you? And now we hear from Reese something about the field generated by a living organism. Nothing dead will go. And as soon as he said that, I was like, except the liquid metal Terminator in T2 and the metal Terminatrix in T3. Like, they blew this, even Cameron blew this out in his second film. He was like, you know what, that limits me terribly. I'm not going to do that anymore. So then we do the phone book thing. Why do you think they were killed in order? Terminator was just being systematic because the machines knew nothing about Connor's mother except the city in which she lived. It's great because we're getting a whole info dump of the plot, but it's disguised as an interrogation scene. We're getting shifting visuals of Traxler and Sarah watching through the TV camera and the camera actually in the room with them. And it's a wonderful way for sci-fi to introduce, a lot of information. And we're given a lot of information here. But with, Silberman playing sort of skeptic, we cutting away a little bit to the Terminator repairing itself. It goes over fine, So there's this last little scene where the Traxler and Vukovich are trying to explain to Sarah how it would have been possible for the Terminator, this man who they think it is, to survive. Traxler shows her some body armor. Vukovich says, it could have been high on PCP. She's like, how did he punch his hand through a window? And so they're giving her explanations about how this could have happened for real. And then we get a throwaway line. It'll be at least an hour before your mother gets here from Big Bear. So again, a little drop about another Connor in this world. And the last line, for Traxler, you'll be perfectly safe. We have 30 cops in this building. Then we cut to the sort of front lobby of the police station, and Silberman is sort of checking out. And he pauses to kind of look at his watch or something, and the Terminator passes him on the way in, and Silberman leaves. And we get some lines from the Terminator about Sarah Connor, and of course he leans in at the end and gives his iconic, "I'll be back." And we see him at one point scanning the structure of the little booth the guy's sitting in, obviously, seeing where the stress points are, where its weak points are. So then we have this incredible police station scene. It starts with very close-up shots of the officer of the day doing paperwork, and then, some headlights where headlights should not be. Car crashes through the front, kills that guy, and the Terminator gets out with an AK-47 in one hand and a shotgun in the other. We cut to Sarah, and we sense that Sarah feels the jolt. Terminator right away just starts walking into the police station and slaughtering cops. And immediately Traxler runs into Sarah. He's like, just stay put, don't come out, and we're going to find out what this is. You'll be fine. Terminator short circuits the power, so everything's dark, and it can still see with its scanning technology. And at one point during all this firefight, Traxler is killed. Vukovich is outraged at it. He jumps out. He's killed. At one point, Sarah is hiding under a desk. The place is in complete shambles. She hears Reese, Sarah, and she realizes that, this guy's his only hope. So he gets her out the back, and they steal a car and escape. And Terminator sees them go and kind of, knows he can't catch them, kind of walks off into the night. And boy, what a sequence. What a sequence that was. Probably, in film history, quite an iconic action sequence. So we cut to later that day. Car that they stole has run out of gas, and we hear on the radio the largest single police mobilization in the state's history is underway. So now they take refuge under some overpass, although it looks like kind of like a bunker, too, in the middle of nowhere. It's really kind of weird. Sarah discovers that Reese took a bullet, and she applies a field dressing, and we start hearing about her son. And Reese describes how potent he is as a leader. I would die for John Connor, although we don't know, nothing was known about John's father, which, we find that out later on. But then we get a sense of Reese and that he volunteered to meet the legend, that Sarah was like this legendary figure who taught her son to fight and to all these techniques. And, she's a waitress in L.A. and she has this nice little kind of breakdown moment where she's like, I can't even balance my checkbook. Do I look like the mother of the future? Hamilton, not the best actress in the world. She can do conviction, and which is why I think in T2 she really nails it. But not because she's a good actress, because, she worked out a lot, and she just is very convicted in the way that movie stars are convicted in their role. But not a lot of natural acting gifts, I would say. Anyway, so Reese describes the future. And as he's describing it, we morph into what we saw in the opening scene and some of his flashbacks. But this time we follow Reese and some of the other soldiers as they kind of head back to one of the human sort of little, where they live, kind of underground, these little underground bunkers. Very sad music cue here. I like this sequence. Very grimy, sort of post-apocalyptic production design, which is very 80s, right? But a lot of shadows. There are dogs guarding the entryway, lots of smoke in the place, and very dramatic lighting. While Brad Fiedel has this nice sad music cue, we're getting a look at the refugees, kids, families, old and sick people. It's a really nice touch. There's a small girl watching a fire inside an old TV set, which is kind of cool. Kids are scavenging around for rats. So Reese finds a place to kind of sit and chill for a minute, and he pulls out a photograph, and it's Sarah and some dog. And then all of a sudden the dog barks, and we see a T-800 enter the bunker with this huge, like, smart weapon, laser weapon, and just starts shooting everyone in the place. Totally, no one can touch it. Small bit of trivia here that the actor playing this T-800 is not Arnold. It's a bodybuilder by the name of Franco Columbu. Franco and Arnold competed side by side in a lot of the Mr. Universe titles. I think Franco competed in a different weight class. There are weight classes in bodybuilding like in boxing, so you can win a Mr. Universe sort of for your weight class. But I think they've been longtime friends forever. If you watch The Last Action Hero, the fake movie in the movie, you see come up a Franco Columbu film. So, Arnold's still using his old buddy's name even early into the 90s. And the gun that the T-800 is using here reminds me of the smart guns in Aliens that I think it's Drake and Vasquez use in Aliens, those kind of smart guns that are really based off of like Steadicam. Really Steadicam harnesses, but Cameron put guns on them, which is kind of cool. And that's what this reminded me of. Like, he must have had that idea back in the day. One chilling last moment here. I really love this, in that as a fire started, Reese watches the photograph of Sarah burn up in the fire and then looks down the hallway. In the smoke and the flames, all we see is the outline of the T-800, but we see its red eyes glowing in the shadows. Very cool, very cool. I mean, Cameron's not the most poetic of directors, so, when these scenes pop into the movie, I'm like, very cool. So now we cut back to the Terminator in his motel room. His face is not looking very good, and this time they leave it because we're getting the sense that all the damage that's happened to his skin, his outer shell, is not doing very well. We see a cleaning guy outside the door, and he's like, sounds like a cat died in there. And now we're in the red screen from the Terminator's point of view, and he's choosing the replies to the guy, and of course it's, fuck you, asshole. Which is so many. I think Arnold's got like 11 lines in the whole movie, right? But half of them are like timeless, iconic action movie lines. So then we cut to Reese and Sarah, and they've checked into some hotel on the outskirts of Los Angeles. Reese specifically requests a room with a kitchen, and we find out later because he goes shopping and brings back mothballs and ammonia and all this bleach because he's going to make plastic explosives. However, while he's gone, we see Sarah on the phone with her mother. We hear the mother's voice on the other end of the phone, and the mother's demanding to know where she is, and she's like, I can't tell you. I was told not to say where I am. And we hear that, I guess, after the police station incident, Sarah had called her mother and told her to stay in the cabin, not to come get her, which is the tiniest of tiniest continuity errors, because Vukovich and Traxler had said that she was on her way from Big Bear and would have arrived at the police station in short order. So somehow, in a non-cell phone era, she's got a hold of her, but whatevs. However, Sarah sort of says, look, I'll give you the number where I am staying. And so as she's relaying the number to her, quote, mother, we cut to the other end of the phone line. First, we see a door that's been blown apart with a good bullet hole in it. And then we track over and we see the Terminator on the phone with her, speaking in the voice of her mother. And again, he gets the phone number and then calls it, and in his normal voice asks the guy, please give me your address there. So again, that's how he finds him, and it's very clever. So back at the cabin, they make plastique, which is these sort of pipe bombs filled with this plastic explosive. At the same time, we see the Terminator racing towards them on a bike. At this point now, we get the Sarah and Reese sort of love scene. We hear that Reese is basically a virgin, and he's never been with a woman, and that he was given sort of Sarah's picture by John, and he fell in love with her. We get this line, I came through time for you, Sarah. And then, he kind of walks over to the other side of the room. I shouldn't have said that. But she's, taken with him and blown away by this whole thing, and they have sex. In an 80s sex scene, you get to see Linda Hamilton's body a bit. It's okay. There's some pathos, I think, mostly because of Brad Fiedel's haunting little moment here. Like, this is all they're going to have. And there's a nice line later on that Sarah will use. We had one night, but we loved a lifetime's worth, which just kind of had some nice B-movie pathos to it, as it were. The next morning, Reese and Sarah hear the dog barking, and immediately we're from the perspective of the Terminator, red screen. We know that he's there. We follow it to their cabin, tags the place with gunfire, but they've gone. They've stolen a truck. Terminator steals a bike, and it's another chase. So during this chase, Sarah winds up taking the wheel. Reese throws plastic pipes at it, but continually misses. Reese is actually hit when he can't toss a plastic pipe fast enough. It kind of blows up, and he's incapacitated a bit. But Sarah winds up running the Terminator off the road as it tries to close with her. But she flips the truck. So the Terminator's down, but they're also upside down. And so now there's this moment of tension where the Terminator gets up. A semi-driver has pulled off the road and basically run over Arnold, and chewed up the Terminator pretty badly. But it winds up stopping, and the Terminator sort of throws the driver out, and the other guy jumps out when the Terminator gets in the driver's seat, and we get the get out. So the Terminator is revving up the truck to destroy Sarah and Reese, and Sarah has to pull them both out. And so now there's a brief chase between the semi and two human people on foot. And at some point they split up, and Reese throws one of his last plastic pipes into this little sort of hollow tubing of the truck, blows the truck to smithereens, and it's this massive explosion. It's sort of the first death where you think it's the climax of the film. Like, they blew him up, it's over. Now we see Sarah, there's some time given here. Sarah relaxes and watches the T2 kind of come out of a cab and fall down, and its flesh burn off, and Sarah thinks that it's dead. She finds Reese. As Kyle and Sarah are consoling each other, we see the Terminator behind them now, shorn of flesh, rising up, and we see it in its pure form. And it's a really cool design, man. It's elegant in the terms of, like, it doesn't have to be a lot of metal on it. So its torso is kind of empty, except for its spine, because it doesn't need all that, There was flesh in there. So basically, the way the effects are done, the camera kind of goes Ray Harryhausen stop motion. When the full Terminator is in the screen and it's moving. And stop motion basically means that they have this fully posable creature that's standing there. They take one frame of film, they move it slightly in several key places. They take another frame of film. Like, it takes forever. And it's possible that they even did this with a miniature. And then if you put those frames together and speed it up, it looks like it's moving. And this is classic Ray Harryhausen and all those old classic monster movies in the 50s and 60s. The Sinbad and the Jules Verne Mysterious Island adaptation, all that stop motion stuff. And it's great. I don't know. It looks fine. And what's cool here is that he cuts from a life-size model of the full Terminator. So, like, in one scene, we're behind it as it's moving, and it's really there. Like, it's definitely there, but we don't see all of it, right? But then there's another shot of its feet clicking over the street, and then its arms grasping. So, like, there's the stop motion that happens, but then we're intercut with actual real pieces of metal that to scale. And the way it's all put together makes it really work very well. I think Cameron really smart, very much like Lucas in Star Wars, where you're cutting from models to real guys and real cockpits. And, when you mash that together with a lot of action, it's seamless, and it really puts you in the place. So kudos, very well done. So basically, it's Sarah's show now, as Kyle is kind of like barely hanging in there. She's got to help him. Luckily for them, they arrive at a robotics plant, which is kind of funny. And Kyle basically turns on all the machines, he says, for cover. So the Terminator will get confused with all the movement and won't be able to track them as easily. And then there's a real tension-filled moment where, Reese just won't get up. And they're right by the door that they just locked, and the Terminator's punching its way through. And very much, Cameron playing with how much tension he can pile on. So at one point in the place, Sarah and Reese are edging back up a ladder, and the Terminator's right there. Sarah runs, and Reese tries to take it down with his big pipe. Terminator's not having it, knocks him back. Reese goes for one last moment, and his last pipe bomb, he jams it right into the carapace of the Terminator, like where its guts kind of were. It blows up, and it blows it completely apart, and also kills Reese in as well. So now you have this second climax. and you think that it's over, and Sarah's leg is pretty incapacitated, so she can't walk. She had some piece of metal jammed in there. She discovers Reese quite dead from the explosion, as she should be. I felt that this was correct, like that Reese died. It gives the film kind of a sour note, but it gives it like a gravitas as well. Like this poor guy came back in time, sacrificed himself for her. His sacrifice was not in vain, and the fact that the two of them don't survive together, I think, is smart by Cameron. Because what do you do with Reese in subsequent films? Like this is her movie. It's ultimately about her, and Kyle's death to me lends the movie a sad note, which again, brings it out of a B movie where the end of most B movies. Anyway, everyone's fine, and so there's something about this that I really like. However, she can't rest too much because the Terminator is still functioning. The upper torso now claws its way towards her, and she crawls away. So it's like it's between two crawlers, and lots of tension. It's grabbing her leg. However, she crawls through what looks like a giant metal press, and she gets to the other side, and the Terminator is now crawling through it as well. And she closes some kind of fence. So at the very edge where she is, the Terminator can't get at her except to stick one arm out to try to choke her. Her eyes kind of go very tough guy, very dead. She reaches around to the on button, and we get the line, "You're terminated, fucker," which is not a very potent line, but this huge press comes down, and we see that weird lightning, which we saw in the beginning of the film now, as the Terminator's power source is crushed, and the lights go out in its eyes, and we see it literally being crushed flat by this thing. So we've got our final climax, where the bloody thing is dead, dead, dead. And all that's left really is the crushed misshapen hunk of metal in there, the actual arm sticking out, which very cleverly will play into T2. Very clever. So then we have our last sequence. Some time has passed. Sarah is in some southern Mexico desert. She pulls into a gas station in a Jeep. She's pregnant, and she's with a dog. She's recording cassettes. Cassettes, I love it. She's recording cassettes for John for the future when he's born. And she's ruminating, should I tell you about Kyle? I probably will. One night we loved a lifetime's worth. She's very sweet. And it's a very sad music cue, because this poor woman, there's something about her asking for gas by reading the Spanish from the little book that's very tender. Like, you realize, and just in that moment, I think Cameron got like, this is some tough woman, man, and don't let her exterior fool you that she's actually inside. She is steel, in a way. It's a nice little moment. Then we have our last little Twilight Zone moment where this little Mexican boy comes up and takes a Polaroid. And we see when the Polaroid exposes that it's the picture that John Connor had given Kyle. She will give Kyle again. And it's this wonderful ending, the da-dum, dum, da-dum, the ending, the beginning theme kicks in, and she drives off into the distance. And you're like, there's so much to come. Like, the end is such a great ending because, man, it's almost like the story hasn't even started yet. Like, what is she going to have to do to get this kid taken care of? And so just a great, great ending, I thought. So one little tidbit here is the science fiction writer Harlan Ellison stated that he loved this movie when he saw it and was blown away by it, but he believed that the screenplay was based on a short story and an episode of The Outer Limits that he had written titled Soldier. So he threatened to sue for copyright infringement, and then supposedly, Orion, I guess the company that distributed the film, settled with him in 1986, gave him a chunk of money. And at the end of The Terminator, if you look at the credits, the first thing that flashes on the screen, an acknowledgement to the works of Harlan Ellison. I don't know. I mean, I've seen both of the Outer Limits episodes, and, he has a point. I do see the similarities of the plot and everything, but, oh my God, I mean, I'm sure you could keep digging and find within the genre other similar things, but, he got some money out of it, so just thought I'd share that little tidbit. So the legacy of Terminator here, basically, this is a franchise that is very much alive. T2 was released years later, 1991, was a huge smash, did bigger business and got better reviews than the first one. And at that point, Cameron abandoned the franchise and wound up wanting to make other films. He had other fish to fry. But Jonathan Mostow made T3. Rise of the Machines in 2003, and then McG made Terminator Salvation 2009. And this year we have, I don't even know who the director is, Terminator Genesis. And from what I can see, they're doing like a Back to the Future 2 type of thing where we're going to actually see, a shot-for-shot remaking of the original film, but with a new plot line kind of railroad into it, which will be interesting. The trailers look very unpromising, but being a Terminator devotee, I will go and, throw my hat into the ring. There was a brief TV series, I believe it was one season, the Sarah Connor Chronicles in 2009. A decent amount of novelizations and actually standalone novels written in the, some of them are written in the T2 universe, some of them are written in the T3 universe because they're definitely separate. There are comic book runs of Terminator and its different iterations. But boy, I watch it now in good old 2015. And I still think it stands very well. I think the only flaws in the film really are the action sequences and some of Brad Fiddel's music. I mean, I think so much of it really works. And it's a testament to many things, Cameron's screenplay for this film and for T2, they're just crackerjack stories. There's not one wasted scene. Crackerjack stories that get you right off. Arnold's inhabiting of the Terminator was just a stroke of luck / genius. That Arnold kind of knew it, and Cameron could tell that Arnold knew it. Bean is great. I think Linda Hamilton she becomes more indispensable in T2. I think in this film she was okay. There are moments where she definitely has some nice pathos. Yeah, just overall, I mean, just a crackerjack movie that still works, even though it was made and released in 1984. So I will definitely be covering the Terminator franchise in great depth. I'm going to cover all of the films. I will not cover the Sarah Connor Chronicles, but I will cover T2, T3, Salvation, and Genesis in upcoming podcasts. Because this is, the Terminator is a seminal franchise, so deserves its due. And that's it for this episode. I want to thank you for listening very much. And you can find us on iTunes. And if you have a smartphone, you can search in the smartphone app for Sci-Fi on Screen. You can subscribe and get new episodes as they drop once a week. We're at sci-fionscreen.com, and there's a Facebook page, Sci-Fi on Screen, as well. So that's all from Sci-Fi on Screen, and I'll see you next time.